Every empire that ever stood believed it was eternal. Rome believed it, Byzantium believed it, and the Ottoman Empire, the most disciplined military machine the world had ever assembled, believed it right up until the moment it didn't. Because empires don't fall to armies they can see, they fall to the rot they refuse to smell. And the rot didn't come from the border, it came from the throne room. A boy of 11 sat on the largest empire on earth, not because he was ready, not because he was chosen, because the men who killed his brother needed someone small enough to ignore and just old enough to sign their orders. They had already murdered one sultan. They had already paraded another through the streets in chains. They had already proven that the throne was not a seat of power, it was a seat of permission. And the men who granted it had already tasted blood. So when this boy looked out from the palace windows at a capital drowning in wine, corruption, and conspiracy, when he watched the same Janissaries who swore to die for him sell their swords to the highest bidder, he understood something no history book records in plain text. The empire wasn't dying from the outside, it was being dismantled from the inside, by the very men sworn to protect it. And if he did nothing, he would be the next name in the chronicles of the killed, not by invasion, not by plague, by his own uniform. If you think absolute power means absolute safety, if you think a throne guarantees obedience and not the other way around, your heart is about to race. Because this story proves that the most dangerous enemy doesn't wear a foreign uniform, he wears your own. So what makes a boy of 11 grow into a man who would walk through the streets of his own capital in disguise and strangle anyone who broke his law with his own bare hands? And what single decision, made in silence, recorded in no chronicle, delivered through no messenger, proves this was never about cruelty for its own sake? By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what that decision was and why it changed everything. He tried what no sultan his age had ever dared: rebuild an empire from the inside out, not with armies, but with fear. The kind of fear that makes a judge kneel in snow, the kind that makes a grand vizier disappear before dawn, the kind that makes 10,000 soldiers sober overnight. His plan was surgical. Not conquest abroad, conquest at home. Strip the corruption from the capital, purge the provinces, replace the poisoned with the loyal, and do it all before the empire bled out. This isn't ancient history you can forget. It's the biological blueprint of every institutional resurrection. The moment a system built on decay is confronted by the architect who refuses to accept it. By the end, you won't just know how he did it. You'll carry the warning signs the empire ignored, and the one question that could have destroyed him, that could destroy anyone who leads before they learn this lesson. You should know that the story behind it is much darker than it appears, and you will find everything I promised you here: the midnight inspections, the secret disguises, the judge kneeling in the snow, the coffee houses burned to the ground, and the evidence that spread silently throughout the city. All of this is true, and the worst is yet to come. So what made an empire of 30 million people obey a boy who became a tyrant, and then a legend? The same pattern. Young reformer against entrenched decay that refuses to surrender power, repeats from ancient Rome to modern boardrooms. This is the story of Murat IV, the Sultan who tried to save the game from the Janissaries and became the game instead. To understand why one judge lived and another died, you must understand what nearly destroyed the throne itself. 3 years earlier, the empire he inherited was already unraveling. In 1632, Janissary rebels rose in the streets of Istanbul, and Husrev Pasha, one of his father's most trusted men, was cut down before the palace gates, while the crowd outside chanted for more blood. You are 17 years old. You watch armed men gather beneath your own windows, demanding the throne answer for its weakness. Because a boy sultan cannot rule through fear alone, Murat did something no one expected. He stopped hiding behind his guards. At night, wrapped in a plain cloak, he walked the city himself, hunting the ringleaders one by one through streets that still smelled of smoke and spilled wine. His own men learned to recognize him by the sound of his voice before they ever saw his face. Therefore, when Husrev's killers were finally found, the Sultan did not simply order their deaths from a distance. He stood in the courtyard and watched the sentence carried out himself. He appointed a new commander, Kurza Mehmet Aga, and gave him one order: purge the core of every man with blood on his hands, or dig his own grave beside them. But rebellion in the barracks was only half the disease. His advisor, Koçu Bey, brought him something worse: a private report describing a capital drowning in disorder, taverns spilling drunk men into the streets before noon, gamblers plotting new governments over cheap wine, murders in alleys no watchman dared enter after dark. The Sultan read every page in silence by candlelight and set it down without a word. He did not yet know that within a year, half his city would be ash, and that the fire would only be the beginning. Fire began in a run-down district in 1633. No record explains exactly how, only that it moved faster than men could run. By the time it stopped, close to half of Istanbul lay in ash. Officials fought it, pashas fought it, and when word reached the palace, the Sultan himself came down into the smoke, sleeves burned, giving orders no one had ever seen a ruler give with his own hands. Because the fire followed years of riot and blood, the people of the capital did not see an accident. They saw a curse. The same curse, some whispered, that had once frozen ships to the sea under a different sultan's reign. Murat heard the whispers. He answered them not with denial, but with law. Within weeks, he banned wine. He banned tobacco. He ordered every tavern and coffee house in the city torn down. After the call to evening prayer, no one could walk the streets without a lantern in hand. After night prayer, no one could leave their home at all. His men enforced it without mercy. When smoke was seen curling from a chimney one night, the household inside was dragged into the street before dawn. But the law had a weakness, and Murat knew it. The Janissary rolls were still full of ghosts, tailors, shopkeepers, men who had bribed their way onto the payroll without ever lifting a weapon. So Murat disguised himself as a tradesman and walked into the recruiting office alone. "I am a simple merchant," he told the clerk. "Register me, and I will bring you a share of my wages every month." The clerk smiled and told him to come back on payday. He did not know who he was smiling at. Not everyone welcomed the silence in the streets. In the ruins of a gambling den near the shore, a different kind of plan was taking shape. Men who had lost their trade to the new laws, whispering about a different sultan on the throne, Murat's own brother, Shehzade Qasim. The trap Murat had built to catch corruption was, without his knowing it, becoming the very thing that could unmake him. 2 hours before the roads freeze completely, an inspector walks the empire's provinces unannounced, cloak pulled low, boots silent on the cobblestones. You are standing in the frozen courtyard in Iznik. The snow has not been cleared. You are a petitioner who travelled 3 days to reach this judge, and now you watch him kneel. The roads had not been cleared for weeks. Petitioners could not reach the courthouse. Merchants lost entire wagons of goods to the cold. When Murat's inspectors arrived, they found a man known across the province not for corruption, but for the opposite. A judge who had spent years quietly paying off the debts of the poor from his own pocket, asking nothing in return. He was not drunk. He had taken no bribe. His crime was neglect, the roads uncleared, the people unreached. Murat did not ask for an explanation. The order was given. By midday, the sentence was carried out in the same frozen courtyard where petitioners once waited for the judge's mercy. No trial by wine breath, no fine, no installment plan. Because in Murat's law, forgiveness for a drunkard and death for a negligent judge could come from the exact same throne. And no one, not even his own advisors, could predict which one they would receive. Word of the execution reached Istanbul before nightfall. In the coffee houses that still stood, men who had once whispered about corrupt courts now whispered something else entirely, that the Sultan had killed a man who fed beggars with his own silver. The ulema heard it first. They did not forget it. And somewhere in the capital, a prince who had said nothing so far was about to become very useful to the wrong people. The Sultan who ordered the execution did not fall from power. He did not face a tribunal, a rebellion, or a single public accusation to his face. Because in his empire, the law that killed a judge in Iznik and the law that forgave a drunkard in the capital were, on paper, exactly the same law. But the people closest to the executed judge did not simply move on. His debtors, the ones he had quietly freed from ruin, lost the one man in the province who had ever shown them mercy. Petitioners who had once traveled to his courthouse now had nowhere reliable to turn. Therefore, the ulema, the empire's religious scholars, began to speak of the Sultan differently. Not as a reformer, as a man who could kill goodness itself and call it law. The hidden winner of this moment was never Murat, and it was never the judge. It was the faction quietly gathering around his brother, Shehzade Qasim, a prince who had done nothing, said nothing, and risked nothing, yet grew more valuable to the discontented with every execution the Sultan ordered. What survives of this episode comes not from a single chronicle, but from a pattern. Ottoman court records noting the execution, European diplomatic dispatches noting the unrest, and later accounts adding the detail of the judge's charity, a detail no contemporary source confirms, but one no later source removes. Centuries later, the corps he tried to purge that year would be dismantled entirely, in a reckoning far bloodier than any stolen wage could explain. But in 1633, no one in Istanbul could have imagined how far that story would go. What they knew was smaller and closer. A plot was already forming. And this time, it wasn't aimed at a judge. We are back at that door. Iznik, winter, 1633. Snow, torches, frozen stone. You are standing in that courtyard again. The question from the beginning of this story was never really about how the judge died. It was about why, at the same throne, under the same law, with the same sultan, one man walked free and another man knelt to die. History offers three answers, and they do not fully agree. The first, recorded in Ottoman court chronicles written closest to the event, is institutional. Murat's law recognized no geography. The capital was forgiven because the capital could be watched. The province was executed because the province had to be warned. Therefore, the killing was the system defending itself. This interpretation treats the Sultan as rational actor, distributing mercy where control was possible and terror where it was not. The second is personal. The Iznik judge was honest. He emptied his own purse for beggars. His goodness made him unforgettable and therefore useful as a message. So the death was not the verdict, it was the medium. The third lives in the silence around Qasem Sultan, in the intelligence delivered across the empire, in the coordination that ran too smoothly for improvisation. Several Ottoman chronicles place her influence at the edges of the purge, never at the center, never explicitly named. She was never tried. No investigation was opened. The drunk judge in Istanbul was fined and freed. The honest judge in Iznik was kneeling and killed. What survives is what the survivors chose to preserve. The records do not answer it. The snow does. 2 years later, a sultan named Murat IV stood at the gates of Baghdad. He took the city in 40 days. He called it reconquest. The judge in Iznik had tried to do the same thing. Rebuild something clean inside something rotten. He was honest. The door is still there. But Murat IV wasn't unique in history. 2 years later, someone did something even more unthinkable. And that story is darker than this one.